Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Federation of Swiss Protestant Churches, I would like to welcome you all here in this hall, listening on the information channel of Swiss television and on live stream on the internet. I welcome you most warmly to the Open Forum Davos 2008. You can see that the Open Forum has already started. At this panel and this hall, you will, I hope, be hearing some very passionate and interesting debates in the next 3 days and also help shape them. The guests who will participate in the panels and in the discussions and those who will passively listen and actively listen and participate in the discussions have been the ones who have turned the Open Forum into what it has become: controversial, open, persistent. The Open Forum of Davos is controversial. We put questions, and this year again, the subjects that the 7 panels will be discussing are topical, burning, and controversial. Is the return of what is religious a potential danger for secular state? Who are these private equity funds who or which are buying up increasingly large companies? What is the political leadership position and role of the United States? Will Russia make use its force as a supplier of energy to bear pressure on Europe? How can we overcome the political split in climate protection? How do virtual worlds influence our coexistence? So we will make sure that there will be discussion together. This year again, with the World Economic Forum, we have decided which subjects are to be discussed so that the right questions will be addressed to the right people. We are very happy to note that the panelists have accepted to participate in this open forum and that they are willing to pick up the challenge. The second key word that defines the forum, open, the name itself indicates that we want to open things up. The Open Forum Davos is a bridge between the World Economic Forum and the public that is interested in topical matters, and that is critical. We assume that there is a need for dialogue, and we also assume that genuine progress can only be achieved together and not side by side. This is why we always invite the participants of the World Economic Forum, experts and those in charge of civil society, those in charge of the churches, and you to attend this forum. We all, the public, are important counterparts of those who have to take political decisions. The full hall here and the interest of the media indicates that this dialogue is highly desirable. So we are inviting you to shape it in an open way here, not only at the middle school, Alpine Middle School of Davos, but also on the internet. In fact, you can also contribute your opinions, your comments and your proposals and questions on the internet on www.openforumdavos.ch. Third keyword that characterizes the forum, which is persistence. For the 6th time, the vision of reality that we presented to the World Economic Forum 6 years ago for the first time, we, the Federation of Swiss Protestant Churches, is going to be repeated again this year. Since 2003, we have put questions persistently. We have asked those in charge of politics, the economy, the social society to participate with us in this constructive dialogue. We are all responsible for the future of mankind, of our planet, of the creation of God. As a community of churches and religious communities, we want to do everything we can to defend justice, peace, and the preservation of creation. I wish you all a very controversial, open, and persistent 6th Open Forum Davos 2008.
Besten Dank, Herr Pfarrer Wipf.
Thank you, Mr. Wipf, Parson Wipf. Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, it is a pleasure for me as well to welcome you here to the Open Forum Davos 2008 on behalf of the World Economic Forum. I'm very pleased that we can organize it for the 6th time together with the Federation of Swiss Protestant Churches. It has become an established forum in which citizens who are interested can discuss with politicians, economic leaders and experts, and to discuss these issues of a global challenge. I would like to thank all those in charge of the Federation of Swiss Protestant Churches, as well as my colleagues who have done so much to prepare this open forum in Davos, and which has been so successful. We have always tried to have a controversial discussion of topical themes and a discussion by experts. Today we will have a first debate on the comeback of religion, a potential danger for the secular state question. This is a problem also in Switzerland. Secularization has always been a very important step in Europe for the peaceful coexistence between religions. We will try to find out in this discussion whether a balance can exist between the culture and style of life in our countries, which is marked by Christianity, and, for example, the understanding the Islamic world has of the relationship between the state and religion. Dear guests, I hope that you will enjoy this interesting debate, and I hope you will come back to the meetings in the next few days. I would like to also welcome the panelists, and I'm now happy to give the floor to the moderator, Mr. Marco Meyer, Chief Editor of the Swiss-German Radio. A warm welcome to this first panel discussion of the Open Forum Davos 2008. I think it's a very beautiful and good omen that we are starting in the shadow of the World Economic Forum to shed some light on transcendency, on religion, on the importance of religion. What we have planned to do, and if you look at the title, there are 3 premises in this title, to examine these 3 premises: return and comeback of religion. The question is this a fact? Or is it just an assumption or a hypothesis? Or is it simply insinuated? Or is it a personal, individual desire for this return of religion? Then the second question is it a potential danger? Why do we even call it a danger right from the outset? And then what is the relationship between religion and state? Is there a possibility of coexistence between the two? I'm very pleased now to introduce the panelists to you. On my left, Professor Ingrid Mattson. She is Professor for Islamic Studies in Hartford, and she is the first woman president of the Islamic Society of North America. Then on the extreme right, former president of Iran, of the Islamic Republic of Iran. He is now president of the Foundation for Dialogue Among Civilizations, Mr. Mohammad Khatami. As I said, he was a former president of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and he has always been very present in this discussion between religion and government or state. Most welcome to you, Mr. Khatami. On my right, Thomas Wipf, who is president of the Council of the Federation of Swiss Protestant Churches and president also of the Council of Faiths. Then on my left, Ulrich Schlür, who is a co-organizer of the Minaret Initiative. He's a member of the Swiss People's Party of Switzerland, and he's a historian. Welcome to you, Mr. Schlür. And last but not least, we also have the representation of the law. Professor Andreas Klei. He's professor at the University of Zurich. He's professor for constitutional law and constitutional history and philosophy. A most warm welcome to you as well, Professor Klei. Mr. Khatami, may we ask you to start the ball rolling? If we look back in history, what is the beginning of the comeback of religion? Well, I think we can pinpoint 1979 and the revolution in Iran, the return from Paris of this was the beginning, do you think, of a worldwide comeback of religion? I've forgotten a lot of my German, says Mr. Khatami, and I don't speak English.
To speak in Persian, and my interpreter will translate to English for your audience, ladies and gentlemen. بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. این که ما صحبت میکنیم از بازگشت چیزی، به این معناست که چیزی بوده، یک زمان غایب شده و دوباره برگشته است.
You're talking about that something is returning back, it means that it used to exist, and for some time it was absent, and now it is returning back.
آیا مذهب چنین است؟ یه روزی حاکم بر زندگی انسان‌ها بوده، یه روزی از زندگی انسان‌ها بیرون رفته و دوباره داره برمیگرده؟
Is it really the religion that sometime it was dominant over the destiny of the humankind, then it was absent, and again it is returning back?
این سوال را باید دقیقاً باز کرد.
That's the question that we have to open.
من اجازه بدید برای اینکه وضعیت کنونی را مطرح بکنم چند نکته عرض بکنم.
In order to shed light on the issue, I would like to refer to a couple of points.
نیچه را همه میشناسید.
You all know Nietzsche.
او اواخر قرن 19 و اوایل قرن 20 زندگی می‌کرد.
He was living by the end of 19th and early 20th century.
در یکی از کتاباش از یک مرد دیوانه‌ای مطلبی رو نقل میکنه که خیلی آشفته به میان جمعیت اومد و فریاد میزد و سخن از یک فاجعه بزرگ می‌داد.
In one of his books, he is referring to an insane man that he was shouting among the public and talking about a crisis that was going on, a disaster.
پرسیدن اون فاجعه چیست؟
And they asked him, what is the disaster you're talking about?
گفت اون فاجعه این است که شما خدا را کشتی.
And he said that the disaster is that you have killed the God.
و اون که منبع عظمت و فضیلت بود از پای در آوردی.
And the one who was the source of all this wisdom is killed.
و دوچار مشکلی شدید که این مشکل برای همه ما خواهد بود.
And now we are facing a problem that is contributed to all of us.
این مسئله در واقع نیچه گرچه کمی افراطی میخواد وضعیت دنیای مدرن رو بیان بکنه که چگونه مفهوم خدا و ارزش‌های خدایی از متنش دور شد.
Bit harsh, but anyhow, Nietzsche is trying to define that how we are having an empty place for spirituality and God in our life.
نیچه برای حل مشکل پیشنهادی داره.
He has proposed a solution for this problem.
او در جستجوی یک ابرمرد سوپرمن هست.
He is looking for a Superman.
که با اراده معطوف به قدرت power to will or مغز to will to will که با اراده معطوف به قدرت بتواند مشکلات را حل
So the Superman would be able to solve the problems based on power to will.
اما اینکه منظور نیچه چیست من در اینجا کار ندارم.
Of course, I do not want to go to detail what Nietzsche means.
چندین سال بعد از نیچه در آلمان و در اروپا حادثه‌ای رخ داد.
Several years after Nietzsche, something took place in Germany.
ابرمدری که نیچه میگفت در صورت هیتلر ظاهر شد.
The Superman Nietzsche was talking about was present there in the form and shape of Hitler.
و نه تنها مصیبت‌ها و خسارت‌هایی برای اروپا که برای کل بشریت ایجاد.
And he made a great loss not just for the German nation but for the whole world.
و پیش از آن نیز اراده معطوف به قدرت بروز و ظهور پیدا کرده.
And even before him we had the experience of power to will.
یعنی به صورت قدرت تسلط بر جهان،
To be dominant over the whole world,
بر طبیعت،
over the nature,
که امروز داریم آثارش رو در ویرانی محیط زیست می‌بینیم.
and the outcomes of such intervention is now something that we are suffering from is climate change and environmental impacts.
تسلط بر انسان‌ها
And also dominance over the humankind.
که در گذشته اسمش استعمار بود
That in the past it was like
و
colonialism.
امروز هم به صورت دیگری این سلطه بر انسان‌ها تأمین میشه.
Still we are suffering from such dominance in another new shape.
این وضعیتی است که در دنیای جدید هست.
That's the situation that we are in now.
البته من به هیچ وجه نمیخوام دستاوردهای بزرگ دنیای مدرن رو انکار بکنم.
Of course,
Mr. President, may I at that point ask you to get to the end of the first issue? We want to open the forum.
ما اگر کنتکست رو معین نکنیم و سوال رو مجرد از زمینه مطرح بکنیم دچار سوء تفاهم.
In order to deliberate the matter, we have to understand the context, otherwise we would be misled.
به یک معنا میخوام بگم در دنیای جدید مذهب به نحوی و خدا و مفهوم خدا مورد غفلت قرار گرفت.
In one word or another, the spirituality and God is neglected in our life.
اما از سوی دیگر میبینیم به نام دین هم جنایات بزرگی شده.
But in the name of religion, on the other hand, we see that they are committing great disasters.
جنگ‌های مختلفی رخ
We have several wars in the name of religion.
تنگناهایی برای انسان ایجاد شده.
And some problems for the humankind caused.
و شاید این نقشی که دین داشته است دنیای غرب را به این نتیجه رسونده است که سکولاریسم میتواند مشکل را حل بکند.
And maybe that was why the Western world believed that secularism can be a solution to this problem.
البته که سکولاریسم کاهش داده جنگ‌های مذهبی رو.
Of course, secularism has decreased the amount of wars that we used to have.
Mr. Khatami, we are now in the situation of secularization, and
We will try and take this a little further. Thank you very much. Professor Madsen, Mr. Khatami has set the picture. What's your personal situation? You are entirely socialized in this religion. When did the time come for you for this comeback of religion in your personal life and in the United States?
Well, if you would like me to begin with from a personal perspective, I could say that certainly for me, religion came back. I was a purely secular person, an agnostic, if not an atheist. Certainly someone who read Nietzsche deeply and was influenced by it. And I was surprised, in fact, when I myself felt the appeal of a connection with God. I felt personally that I didn't need any religion in my life, any spirituality. In fact, I didn't really think about it very much. But as I got older and a series of experiences, I felt this longing for a connection to the divine, to God, and I found that connection through Islam and through Muslim friends who showed me how they connected with God in their daily lives. Now, that was a spiritual connection. It wasn't a question really of religion. And there's a difference between that personal connection with God and then religion. Religion is something that we construct as human beings and are constantly constructing, revising, because our understanding of God is imperfect. Even when we have the perfect guidance of the prophets, still our understanding of their guidance is imperfect. So I'm still on that path to even understanding my own religion correctly, to constantly examining myself. Are my own flaws, faults? Certainly they're in the way, they get in the way of my understanding God. And as a community, my Muslim community that I live with and that I lead in North America, we're always trying to evaluate our practices beside our values and our goals. Are we in fact living our religion in the way that we should? And always there are imperfections, always there are gaps, but this is because we are human and we can only strive for something better. We'll never attain it.
Very, very interesting. Could you perhaps also tell us something about your parents? If I understood you, you were saying that your parents were Christians or are Christians. Did you feel that Christianity was not giving you enough spirituality, and is that why you have looked for it in a different religion, or didn't you even talk about this in your family? Didn't you have this religious core in your home?
You know, I come from a family of 7 children, and of those 7 children, many of us have chosen different paths than the context in which we were raised as young children. I think my parents, certainly who came from mixed background, Catholic and Protestant, gave us very good values. And I share with all of my siblings these values that my parents gave. And I hope I try to live them in my life. Compassion for others, a sense of responsibility to the greater good, to society, a sense of gratitude that whatever we have in our life is not, none of us are self-made men. We are dependent on the achievements of others. And so whether in my family we've gone, some of us went in the path of more secular humanism, some of them more religious in certain Christian traditions, myself in Islam, I feel that we're united in this these basic common values, and that's why we can exist in harmony and hopefully contribute positively to society.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you. Mr. Schlür, before we begin the political debate with you, could you perhaps say something about your personal point of view and the point of view of the Swiss People's Party? What is the position of religion in this context? How are you committed as a historian? Are you personally affected by this comeback of religion, or does this leave you totally unaffected? Answer. If you were to measure the importance or the weight of religion in terms of numbers of people going to church, to Mass, then I don't think we could say there's a groundswell in Switzerland of a comeback of religion. I think one could say that the established churches, those have relationships with the government and the state, have not really experienced a great change. If there is a day of the churches in Germany, for example, then you have masses of people attending such an event. So there seems to be a need for spiritual food or orientation. There is such an evident need, and that this need is perhaps even becoming stronger. That, I think, is a statement we can make. Now, if you mention or if you refer to the Swiss People's Party, I can tell you that I personally am very much in favor of the strict separation between the churches and religion on the one hand and the state. The state obviously has a responsibility for the framework conditions, but should not interfere in church matters and affairs. However, what we cannot exclude in religious terms is that nowadays there is an increasing measure, which may be quite disturbing as well, of putting too much emphasis on religion and what is religious when it is a question of exercising power, that religion is being used to bolster, to support political power, and this is something that I fear in Switzerland. Mr. Wipf, you have participated in fixing the subjects that are to be discussed here at the panel. You are president of the Council of the Federation of Swiss Protestant Churches. Would you say that there is a comeback of religions, or is it something that churches are just wishing to see, because there doesn't really seem to be such a comeback?
There are two aspects which can speak in favor of a return to religion, but the point I want to start with is that religion never disappeared, so to speak. Religion, if we think of it in terms of human question, what are we doing here, where are we going, if we think of it in those terms, and what is it which gives me hope in life, which carries me through life, that is all part of humanity, and what Mr. Schlier said is correct. Outside the institution, of course, there's a great deal more life, in fact, in the church than one believes, but it's not shown us clearly. There are two aspects which mean that we can speak of a return to religion. And I see this particularly in discussions with young people. That's to say that the problems which separate humans and which we have to deal with can only be dealt with on the basis of common sense, belief, and a hope for the future. The question about the future of our planet, for example. Is it the creation of God which has been entrusted to us, or is it a planet which we can exploit? I think that we can only link ecology to spirituality and the question of human rights. This is very clearly linked to the concept that we are all equal before God, and these are elements where increasingly young people are asking these questions. And then in our country we have seen a trend where people said, well, religion is something private and personal, and of course that's correct when we're speaking about the relationship to God and the way in which a person decides how he or she is going to live and experience his religion. But that is not correct if we think about the religious, the impact of religion on society, and this is affected by migration. The religious picture of the country has changed, and there are other views and other concepts now. The question of the link between state and religion, of course, here we have a role to play, because one of the elements of democracy is that state and religion should be separated. And the state is not the protector and the person who guards truth, but freedom is what the state should be responsible for protecting. And therefore we need to deal with religion in a more conscious, more aware mind, but not by establishing ghettos, but by establishing dialogue. Well, now we are in medias res now, really, and there's a real challenge here. Mr. Schlier touched upon this, and Mr. Khatami. And now we've heard Mr. Wipf speak. That's to say, the relationship between private approach to religion, the state and religion. Do you think that this return to religion is something which is really a reality? I can only underscore the fact that the religiosity in practice in my job at the university is increasing in importance. And there is an increasing interest on the part of students in religiosity. If we look at what the federal courts are doing, then we see clearly that over the last 10 or 15 years, there have been very clear decisions taken as regards how one can deal with religious conflicts in relation either to religion and the state and religion and private individuals. And this is something which we shall have to come back to. There's a great deal of jurisprudence here, and one can say that the religious element has always been present. It's never disappeared. And then there's another area which is of great interest to legal specialists, and that is to say the recognition of new religious communities. The question then is, in relation to big communities in Switzerland, where the people do not originally come from Switzerland, we have to look at how we are going to deal with these. We don't wish to create only privileges, of course, and another important point is the constant presence of the religious element below the surface, the immediate surface. If we look below the surface, then we can see that there is a trend, that there is work going on in a sort of symbolic manner. The activities of the legal specialists are very important. It's not, in fact, what one wishes to create, but what is hidden, what is masked in what is said. There have been epic discussions in relation to the preamble to the new constitution, and this preamble to the constitution is a very important issue, but from the legal point of view it's of no real significance, and yet that is what was concentrated upon in discussing the text of the federal constitution. And so we see very clearly that the religious aspect is very, very present. Mr. Schneider, well, let's now go to the very heart of the second premise. That is to say, is there a potential danger for the secular state with this comeback of religion? And I expect, Mr. Schlier, that you would say that there may be a danger, but perhaps you could explain more clearly exactly what you feel. We've spoken about symbolic values and the initiatives against minarets. So what is your position now? The problem is, does a religion transmit only a dogma, a religious dogma, for which an individual can take on board, or is there another one which he can take on board, or is this dogma, this religious dogma, transmitted in a sphere which is linked to a binding legal system which affects society as a whole? This is the problem which today we are confronted with. We are confronted with legislation under the heading of Sharia law, and I think the essential, the very core of the federal constitution is that each individual is equal before the law. And there is a difference between believers and unbelievers in other legislative systems, and there are differences for different people. But I have to say that, and I say this as a president of a parish and a community, I am convinced that each community in Switzerland, if it works carefully and thoughtfully, is constantly today confronted with the problem of forced marriage. And this is clearly against the law. It is contrary to the law. It's illegal to force someone into a marriage against their will. This is not admitted by our law, by the legislation in the country, but it happens. And there are very serious conflicts here, and we believe that these conflicts must now be settled and dealt with. We assume that the rules and regulations here are democratic. They have been established by the population of the country in a democratic manner, and they have to be valid and applicable to all those who wish to live in the country, who live in the country. And this is the conflict which we have to deal with. Thank you, Mr. Schlier, says Mr. Schneider. Mr. Khatami. We've heard in rather offensive or strong terms that there is a certain fear in certain circles that repopulation finds itself in a situation where there is a fear that there may be certain domination of particular groups who have positions which are contrary to the secular legislation of the country. And in your country you have very different systems. Could you say something? Is it possible for you to understand the concerns which there exist in the West, or is it an erroneous fear which exists in relation to this issue?
من
I would like to refer to what you have asked previously.
یک تفاوتی جهان غرب با جهان اسلام داره.
There is a difference between the world of Islam and the West.
در غرب دین و دین حضرت مسیح مهمان یک نظام عرفی مستقر یعنی امپراتوری روم شد.
And you know that the Christianity was the main source of establishment of a holy empire.
و از اول مرز خود مسیح رو با قیصر جدا کرد.
And as of the beginning, they drew a fine line between the Kaiser and the Jesus Christ.
حتی اوگوست کنت اون مدینه و شهر مطلوبش رو شهر خدا نام نهاد که مربوط به عالم روح.
And even August Comte named his ultimate city as the city of God, that would be the main utopia.
بنابراین جدایی دین از سیاست به نحوی از آغاز در غرب مورد قبول قرار
So
گرفت.
as of the beginning in the West, they agreed upon the separation of government and religion.
ولی در اسلام دین تأسیس حکومت کرد.
But in Islam, religion established the government
یعنی مدینه را تأسیس کرد.
and made the Medina the city, the civilization.
و از همون روز به این طرف مسئله آمیزش دین و سیاست در دنیای اسلام مطرح.
And as of the beginning, they started concentrating on religious education and the attachment between these two.
اما بازگشت دین یک واقعیته.
But it's a reality, the return of religion.
چون انسان احساس خلایی کرده به خاطر به اصطلاح غفلت از معنویات.
Because all humankind now feels the gap and the vacuum that the lack of spirituality caused.
اما دخالت دین در امر زندگی سیاسی اگر به معنی محدود کردن زندگی باشه،
But if the intervention of a religion would contribute to limitation of the freedom,
اگر دین بخواد حق و حرمت انسان رو از زیر پا بگذارد،
or would not appreciate the humankind values,
اگر بخواد آزادی هایی که بزرگترین نعمت خداست از انسان ها بگیره،
or religion would like to get the freedom that is God gifted,
این حکومت و این دخالت قطعا زیانباره
that kind of religious government would be a loss.
و جامعه هم این رو قبول نمیکنه.
And the society would never accept such kind of government.
چنان که در غرب سکولاریسم به عنوان راه نجات از این مسئله پذیرفته شد.
As in the West, they have found out secularism as a breakthrough for this
و
problem.
واقعا هم سکولاریسم توانست جنگ‌های مذهبی و محدودیت‌هایی که دین ایجاد می‌کرد تا حدود زیادی از بین ببرد.
And in fact, secularism was successful in reducing the number of the wars and the limitations imposed by religion.
اما آیا سکولاریسم به طور کلی جنگ و ستیز و درگیری رو از بین برد؟
But really, the secularism was able to remove all the kind of wars?
آیا دو جنگ جهانی اول و دوم در نظام سکولارها رخ نداد؟
And the First and the Second World War took place in the secular governments.
آیا دهها جنگ‌های منطقه‌ای که ابداً انگیزه دینی نداشتن رخ نداد؟
We had several regional wars with no religious intentions behind.
و آیا حذف معنویت از زندگی برای بشر مشکل ایجاد نکرده؟
And isn't it true that the loss of spirituality in the humankind has contributed to a lot of
ما اگر
problems?
بتوانیم دین را به گونه‌ای معنا بکنیم که با دموکراسی، با حقوق انسان، با برخورداری انسان‌ها از آزادی، با کارگیری عقلشون سازگار باشد،
We have to define the religion that is compatible with human rights and the freedom.
در عین آن خلأ ارزش‌های معنوی که ادیان بزرگترین مبلغ اون هستند پر بکنه،
Then it would fill the gap or the vacuum that humankind feels.
نه تنها بازگشت دین مشکلی ایجاد
Then
نمی‌کنه،
this kind of return of this kind of religion would not cause any problem.
بلکه می‌تواند بسیاری از مشکلات امروز که به خاطر فقدان ارزش‌های معنوی در جامعه است جبران بکنه.
And this kind of religion may contribute to solving many problems that you are suffering from
آیا
now.
ما می‌توانیم جامعه‌ای داشته باشیم که همه دستاوردهای خوب دنیای مدرن رو داشته باشه،
Are we able to have a society that would have all the technological achievements
در عین حال اضطراب‌ها و نگرانی‌هایی که در اثر دور شدن ارزش‌های معنوی است در او وجود نداشته
as
باشه؟
well
Darf
as
ich an
not
dieser
having those
Stelle
spiritual
wieder
worries?
intervenieren?
معتقدم میتونه دین خطرناک باشه بازگشت،
I believe the return of religion can be dangerous.
اما اگر روح دین برگردد نه تنها خطرناک نیست، میتونه بسیاری از خطرات امروز رو هم
But if the
مرتفع
real spirit of religion comes back, that would be a great solution.
Danke.
The moderator, thank you. The point, Mr. Wipf, the point of secularization. Here, Mr. Katsami has given us a historical background, all the crises, the wars, and secularization or a secular Europe has managed to deal with these. But is that really a result of this second phase of secularization? Well, if we're speaking of secularization, and if we base ourselves on a secular state, then we assume that the state, a secular state, does provide room for all forms of religion and all different kinds of religion, and it doesn't intervene and interfere in religions. In the analysis we heard from Mr. Schleur, there are certain elements which I cannot agree with. We find ourselves facing a major challenge. We are confronted with religious convictions which in the Judeo-Christian context have been overcome. That's to say, the separation between politics and religion. The question is, however, how do we react? Do we want to establish blocks, ghettos? Do we want to ban things, or do we want to establish or strengthen a coalition such as we see in Iran? In Iran, the women are those who are in the forefront of the fight for human rights. And President Khatami has heard that efforts, and we know that efforts are being made for human rights, and these are human rights which grow from within rather than being imposed from outside. Dialogue, of course, means establishing a basis for confidence, and a dialogue means that, first of all, I have to look at the other person who has another religion and look at this concept of peace. This is a central wish and desire of all believers. And here I think we can, following on that, as Mr. Schleur has done, raise very serious issues. Perhaps later I can say something we've had in very difficult and tough discussions, and there are certain positions which perhaps we cannot abandon. That's to say, the equality, gender equality, human rights, the dignity of mankind, and we wish to be together in a dialogue here and a discussion. And I believe that the majority of Muslims in Switzerland are in favor of these values. And so how are we going to deal with these challenges? That's the real question. Mrs. Matters, you indicated to me that you understand that primarily in relation to the Sharia, there are very probably misunderstandings and fears which exist, and perhaps on day X or Y, when the number of Muslims in our part of the world is so great, then that the Sharia may become the basis for a new system of law. How far do you go in your discussions on this issue, in your discussions with other religions?
I think it's important to recognize first that we've been speaking about Islam as if there is an essentialized religion that is fossilized, that we can put in a museum and take out and reproduce. In fact, Islam is what Muslims understand it to be. There are diverse schools of theology in Islam. There are diverse schools of law. There are certainly diverse political philosophies. So Islam itself is something that is debated and contested among Muslims. And what any Muslim community identifies as their own methodology of interpretation, their own core values, what they prioritize over others, is also mixed in with their history, with their own particular culture, that they may mix up with religion. So it's important for us to understand that when we talk about something like Sharia, you cannot pull a book of Sharia off the shelf. There's no such thing. There are thousands and thousands of volumes of interpretation of Islamic law. Sharia literally means the path to the water. It's the attempt to try to understand God's will. So it's more of a methodology. And it's this constant dialogue among the community that produces results that will always be contested. And so what I want to say here is that the Muslim community itself it develops, changes, has the right to challenge our own authorities. And so I think that if we first understand this, then we can deal with specific issues, specific problematic issues that interact with when a certain interpretation of Islam is transported into a particular culture. How does that fit or not fit? And some interpretations or some practices, understandings of Islam may fit very well in America or in Canada, but perhaps not as well in a country like Switzerland at this time that has what is the capacity for a society to absorb change? And I think it is incumbent upon the Muslim community also to be sensitive to that, to be sensitive to the customs and values and cultures, and understand themselves the adaptability of Islam to respond to that, to be good neighbors.
Das ist ja wohl das Zentrum der
Yes, that's the very core of the discussion. From the cultural point of view, can one assume that other cultures are capable of, with their system, dealing with the bases of other systems and integrating? In the university, where one has to live with certain prejudices, then other scenario which are discussed as to how in the future, if there were to be a larger number of Muslims, how would such discussions be dealt with in the future? Well, we have discussed that and thought about it. There are proposals that this fact that there is a large proportion of the population which is Muslim now, this is being worked on and studied at the university. And one, therefore, is trying to ensure that possibly there should be a chair or some studies for the training of religious Muslim leaders. It's a question of having an objective and multifaceted training which would ensure that these people who would then teach children the religion don't represent radical positions. The state here, of course, has a certain interest in ensuring that there is an objective and scientific training, and of course research and discussion on these issues is not something so new. In the 19th century there were serious discussions as to whether or not there should be a theological faculty in Zurich for Catholics, for example, so that the Catholics could be brought more into the liberal line of thinking. And this is a discussion which we have to continue today, and we have to really reflect upon it, and it's certainly worth thinking about and mentioning. I can see Mr. Schleur smiling, and that's exactly the issue. Mr. Schleur, perhaps you're thinking, well, now they've reached that point where we have to be proactive, preventive in our attitude. We have to think about the legal situation. If on day X, for example, we find ourselves facing a situation where we have to introduce a system of Islamic law, in which case it has to be as appropriate and match our culture as far as possible, so that we can defend our own position and maintain the strength of our own law and our own legal system. Is this something which you think can be defended and presented now? Well, I think it would be quite difficult to deal with, but first of all, those who raise really important issues often say, well, we have fears, or we have erroneous ideas and perceptions, and we base ourselves on realities, and the realities are issues which are put on the table by the nation, by the population. We live in a democracy, and we see clearly that there is a need for discussion and dialogue, and that the points of view are correct. Let's take the most recent situation. Yesterday, in one of the Zurich newspapers, there was a long article saying that someone had been appointed as a teacher and who spoke on the basis of the principle of stoning. And someone who has this sort of teaching and beliefs should not be allowed to be a teacher. And I think that was quite correct. It's contrary to human rights that anybody should be in favor of stoning, and it's contrary to everything which is part of our convictions. And now we have to note that on the basis of certain paragraphs, it was not possible to dismiss this man. He's been, in fact, given millions because the legal case was unjust and unfair. In our country, it is not right. That is not correct. That stoning is something which would be condoned. Thank you. President Katami, you've heard the very crass issues, and I think that it's correct and appropriate that we raise these issues. These are issues which just cannot be brought in line with concepts of human rights and human dignity. It's very much a question of the position of women, the stoning of individuals and ideas which in our society is just perfectly unacceptable. The whipping of people, the cutting off of hands, the stoning. Can you understand that in our culture there is tremendous frustration and irritation when these issues are perceived, even if only in the distance?
Sie als liberaler Vertreter.
You are, of course, we know, a liberal representative of Islam.
نه مشکل ما مذهب نه سکولاریسم بلکه افراطگرایی و جذبگرایی بیجاست.
Our problem is not extremism or religion. Is extremism. Sorry. Yeah, that was my mistake. Is the extremism, not the religion or this kind of secularism.
این افراطگرایان چه در غرب چه در مسیحیت چه در اسلام چه در شرق باشه وحشتناکه.
Wherever this extremism exists in west or east, it would be dangerous.
افراطگرایان شکلگرایان.
Extremists are just believing in shapes and forms.
و استفاده میکنن از اون چیزی که بهش مقدس میدونن به عنوان ابزار.
And they just focus on the face value and they just believe that it's holy.
نسبت به دیگری نفرت ایجاد میکنن.
They would create hatred against the others.
و ابزاری جز خشونت در برخورد نمیشن.
And they do not have any tool rather than violence.
و اتفاقا این افراطگرایان بزرگترین ضربه را به دین به هر چیزی که به اون به پیوندن میزنن.
And these extremists have contributed a lot to the loss of religion. Actually, they are contributing to the loss.
من در دیداری که اخیراً با عالی جناب پاپ داشتم.
In the recent meeting that I had with His Holiness Pope, we discussed the terrible situation of the East and West. I told him that we are facing such kind of crisis because of lack of two things. One is love and the other is justice. The spirit of Islam and Christianity is love. And the extremists on both sides are turning the religious justice into extremism and violence. And they turn love to hatred. And we have to overcome this problem. We should not let the secularism be a kind of tool at the hand of extremists on this hand, and on the other hand Islam. But Sharia is the most flexible part of any religion. The thing that doesn't change is the principal values of religions. To get free of any kind of submission and just submit to God. Justice for all. And loving everyone. And to be equal. But these rules belong to different times and different places.
I don't want to interrupt you. I just wanted to put a subsidiary question.
To a long time ago. And they can be changed.
تناسب زمان و مکان این احکام و این مسائلی که مقتضای زمان نیست تغییر بدن.
And we have to change these kind of laws because it is not
Sie
acceptable now.
sagen mit Recht, Herr
Mr. Khatami, you are quite right. You are saying that we have to prevent this divergence and this moving to extremism and bring it back to experiencing it in a normal way. Isn't there a problem of the moderate Muslims not speaking up in the case of extremism? Don't you also think that we are expecting from these moderates to say something and to act? And haven't you yourself also suffered from not getting sufficient support from the West since you were a liberal mullah?
رفتارهای نادرستی که شده است و افراط‌گرایی‌هایی که به عنوان سیاست بوده سبب تقویت افراط‌گرایی در دنیای اسلام شده.
But unfortunately, the kind of wrong policies devised and extremist policies have contributed to promoting extremism in the East.
افراط‌گرایان امروز صداشون بلندتر از دیگرانه.
Extremists are heard louder than the others nowadays.
می‌دونید منطق افراط‌گرایان چی؟
You know what is the logic behind extremism?
هر کس با ما نیست بر ماست
Whoever is not with us is against us,
و ما حق داریم که هر کس بر ماست با هر رفتاری با او انجام.
and we have the right to do anything against our enemies.
شما من نمیخوام نام ببرم. ببینید این منطقی است که در منطقه افراط‌گرایی غرب با منطقه افراط‌گرایی دنیای اسلام یک منطقه ازشون میشنه.
We see that the logic of the extremists in the East and West are the same, quite the same.
و متاسفانه ابزار تبلیغات هم دست افراط‌گرایانه.
And unfortunately, the extremists have the media and the propaganda.
من معتقدم که گرایش‌های اعتدالگرا و منطقی در عمق وجدان دنیای غرب و دنیای اسلام پایگاه بیشتری
I am of the opinion that there is a popular base for middle kind of understanding of religion in East and
و
West.
باید سعی بکنیم که میدان عمل را از دست افراط‌گرایان چه در غرب چه در شرق بگیریم.
And we have to take the lead out of the hand of
An
extremists.
diesem Punkt möchte ich gerne einen zweiten.
Thank you very much for that contribution, Mr. Khatami. At this point, I'd like to ask another representative of an important religion to respond to this subject. Do you believe that there is a renaissance of religion, even if it is not a true renaissance, but there is something that concerns us all? We have asked ourselves whether it's a potential danger. And Mr. Khatami has also touched upon dialogue. We have to create bodies where these subjects can be discussed on a daily basis. Sharia can be interpreted, he said. It's very good for us to hear that Sharia can be interpreted. So how do you deal with this at the Council of Faiths, and how do you, is there a possibility of taking it, or tackling it at the root? Answer, well, we are in a country where we are marked by Christianity and by Judeo-Christianism, have to ask ourselves anew what is the essence of our own faith, our Christian, Judeo-Christian faith. How do we want to live together? We need to be strong when we go into such a dialogue. We lived through a time where we were fascinated by the multiculturality and the multi-religious society, but now we have to ask ourselves, what is my foundation? What is my basis? Obviously, there are many more Christians in Switzerland than there are Muslims. But at the roots, at the grassroots, there are many encounters between people of different faiths in the neighborhoods, in local politics. What Mr. Schlö has said is perhaps not the description of the normal situation, but we all have to put these basic questions. Before the first Iraq war, those who were at the head of the various faiths pointed out that religion may very well be used as an instrument in the wrong way, in the wrong hands, whereas religion can be a wonderful instrument to bring about understanding. This is true of Christianity, of Islam, of all religions. And we, the Christians and the Jews and the Muslims, even though we may think differently in political terms about the forthcoming Iraq war, we may not be split, we may not be separated by this, and we joined in a common prayer in the Minster, in the Cathedral of Bern. And we took note of the fact that there was no single place where we could all get together and talk about all these issues. We concluded that there was a great desire of individuals to understand one another regardless of their individual faith, and that this is the ground on which differences can be discussed. Of course, we have different ideas about God. Our image of God is different. We have a different understanding of the relationship between religion and the state, and Islam obviously has a different point of view. And in Switzerland, which is a country marked by Judeo-Christianism, has different values, basic values, and these values are enshrined in our constitution, and therefore they are the basic values which have to be abided by all who live in this country. But nonetheless, by understanding one another, by trusting one another, by putting questions which may be harsh and difficult to answer, we have to try and find this understanding in religions. This is the only way that we can survive, and this is only possible in interpersonal encounters. Mrs. Madsen, your institution has some very interesting things to report. You also train Protestant imams, is that correct? Could you perhaps tell us or describe to us how you try and establish or maintain a dialogue even through the training of the imams?
Well, before I speak about my particular situation, let me say, just draw out a few things that I think are interesting for us to speak about. On the one hand, we've been speaking about Switzerland as a secular state. On the other hand, it's been referred to as a Judeo-Christian country. And so I think that there has to be some clarity and discussion among the people of this country itself. What is the essential foundation, legal, judicial, constitutional, and on the other hand, what is the historical, cultural heritage? And, it's quite interesting. Even the concept Judeo-Christian, of course, is new. It's something that was developed in the 20th century. Certainly, I'm sure that most of your ancestors in the mid-19th century or earlier than that would not have considered their country to be Judeo-Christian. They would have considered it to be a Christian society. So, the other thing is what I found it interesting to hear, that your public institutions have departments that train clergy people. That would be, in the understanding of secularism in the United States, is that would be a violation of the separation of church and state. So that it's only in private institutions that we can teach religion. You can teach about religion as a topic in public universities, but to train religious leaders, that can only...
You have to get the precision from Wipf after for that. It's not really like that.
Okay, so it can only be in private institutions. And what's interesting in the situation that I'm in at Hartford Seminary, which is a historically Protestant seminary, 175 years old, one of the oldest seminaries in the United States. I know that's not old for you, for Europe, but it's old for the United States, is that one of the main foundations of this seminary was a missionary training seminary, a place to train Christians to go and convert Muslims to Christianity, to send them to the Middle East. So it was the first place in the United States to teach Arabic, not just as an objective subject, but specifically as a tool for evangelizing Muslims. And I have to give great, acknowledgement to those people, those Christians in the seminary who a generation ago examined their own understanding of Christianity and said, you know, we are not being true to Christianity by one trying to convert other people by distorting their religion. That we've been saying things about Islam and Muslims that we found that Muslims themselves didn't believe, and that it would be more honest if we brought Muslims to speak for themselves. And so what we have at our seminary is this organic development now approximately 30 years where Muslims have taught Islam, Christians have taught Christianity. Muslims learn about Christianity from Christian clergy, and Christian clergy learn about Islam from Muslim professors. But one of the best things is that our students train together in some of the basic skills that all clergy people need. Pastoral counseling, how to run a congregation, to take care of the finances and management, human development. And so there's this common curriculum that means that there's a sense of collegiality among people of different faiths at the same time that each retains their own specificity. And I think that is perhaps one of the challenges that you have in your country, is that perhaps the Muslim community is not as established as ours in the United States is, where we have a few generations of Muslims. We have Muslims who were born and raised in the country, and maybe even for 2 or 3 generations. So they're encultured at the same time that they are also deeply committed to their faith. So some of the cultural obstacles have already been passed, and the engagement is at a much more productive level. So I would say, you know, societies change. There needs to be some patience for the Muslim community to grow and to develop the capacity to be able to interact in a professional and meaningful level. But to the extent that, if not the state, but other organizations, other religious organizations, civic organizations, can give that support to the Muslim community to be more professional, to be more well-educated, even from their own perspective, I think it will benefit the country as a whole.
Okay, thank you. Vielen Dank, Frau Madsen.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Madsen. You know that we are here at the open forum, and we would like to open the forum to the public, to the audience. But Mr. Wipf would just like to clarify the situation in Switzerland regarding training. Well, at the theological faculties of the state universities, we do not train clergy, women and men. That is done by the churches. But the faculties of theology of the universities are simply part of the university's curriculum. This has been the case for centuries, particularly because of the following reason: because religion must be open to criticism, and that is something we have to make Islam understand. It has to be criticized in a scientific way. Anyone can study theology, but the spiritual part of the training then happens at the churches, in the churches, and by the churches. Thank you, Mr. Wipf. Now, if you wish to take the floor, if you are in the audience and you want to put a question, raise your hand. Someone will give you a microphone. Please give your name and your function, or your position, and please, no statements. Put short questions. You can give a very short expression of your opinion. Detlef Busch from near Berlin. I have a question, actually, to everyone here. Who of those who are Christian here been able to make it clear to Mr. Khatami or Mr. Gates that Jesus came as the king of all, and he came on this earth to reign over all? This is something that we, the Christians, do not make clear. Well, what is the question this? Well, why are they doing it?
Wer möchte auf diese Frage?
Who would like to answer this question? Mr. Khatami very neatly described the development the time of unity between secular and spiritual power. So this question is perhaps not so misplaced. Well, Jesus was greater than our heart, and if you are saying that this is your personal truth, then I have a lot of respect for that. The same applies to me. But Jesus helps me to learn more and to be more open and understand that other people have chosen a different path, are also the children of God. That is our truth. But we cannot claim that it is the only truth and our only truth.
Ein kleinen Moment.
Just a minute. Mr. Khatami would like to respond as well.
نظر یک مسلمان همه پیامبران خدا از مسیح و موسی و ابراهیم و محمد یکسانند و اعتقاد به همه اونها به عنوان پیامبران خدا لازم.
In Islam, we believe in Jesus, Moses, Abraham, and all the prophets of God, and they shall be respected equally.
دوم معتقدم که در اصول کاملا این ادیان مشترک.
And I believe that in principle they are all the same.
ما برای تفاهم باید رو مشترکات تکیه بکنیم.
And in order to reach to an agreement, we have to focus on these principles.
در عین حالی که به اختلافات احترام بگذاریم.
And at the same time, respect the differences that we may have.
و اینقدر اصول مشترک هست.
And there are many common grounds.
و اینقدر زمینه برای همکاری برای رفع مشکلات جهان بر اساس این اصول مشترک هست.
And many grounds for cooperation to solve the global issues.
که اگر ما در کنار هم دیگه قرار
That
بگیریم.
if we would have hand in hand.
اختلافاتمون که محترم هم هست.
And respect our differences anyway.
هیچ گونه نقشی در تفاهم میان یکدیگر و محبت نسبت به یکدیگر نخواهد داشت.
And we would have a great contribution to love and solving the problems all over the world.
تکیه بر مشترکات برای حل مسائل مشترک.
We have to focus and emphasize on commonalities to solve the common problems.
Wir haben eine nächste Stellungnahme.
Ja.
Okay.
Thank you. Another question? I think that one aspect has not had enough light shed on it. In the United States, there has been a development of religiosity, right-wing religiosity. Mr. Bush Sr., we shouldn't forget that, was an example. And then we know what happened with Saddam Hussein. And now we have Bush Jr., and we see what's happening now in relation to Iran. And there seems to be a following which is taking place, a red line which is being followed. And now when statements of this kind are linked to war, then there is a radicalization of both sides. And I think that this aspect should be looked at. We always look in one direction only and don't always in the other. It's good that Mr. Wipf said what he said about women. And I think that sometimes you have to remember that when we wanted to collect signatures for women's rights in Switzerland, that it wasn't always very easy for some sections in the church. And now it's not always easy for civilian society. Now my question to Mr. Khatami, can you imagine a forum such as this in Tehran? Because there's tremendous pressure. The pressure is much greater than last year, and the question is whether the boycott, which was decided yesterday, would help civil society to develop, as you said, Mr. Wipf, from within. And the last question, there are many gods. Money can be a god as well. Business can be a god. Nuclear energy can be a god. And can we perhaps then solve the issue in Iran by looking at solar policy? Because I have heard that there is policy concentrating on these other forms of energy. Thank you. What was very interesting in what you said was the first point you made. The others go on into world politics, really. But I think it will be very interesting to hear from Mr. Khatami. Do you believe that as a result of the stronger influence of religion, that now permanently in the West there seems to be a militancy which is felt particularly as a result of this renewal of religiosity, more particularly in America?
It's been 100 years that we are seeking three things.
یکی آزادی چون از قدرت‌های استبدادی رنج برده.
One is freedom because we have been suffering from other powers.
یکی استقلال چون از وابستگی به بیگانگان رنج برده.
The other one was independence because we have been dominated.
یکی پیشرفت چون از عقب افتادگی رنج برده.
And the other one was development because we were hindered.
این خاص تاریخی ملت.
And that was the historical demand of the Iranian nation.
در انقلاب اسلامی یک حادثه بزرگی رخ داد.
In Islamic revolution, something historical
چون
happened
هویت مردم ما هویت دینی است.
because our identity is a religious one.
در انقلاب مردم آزادی، استقلال و پیشرفت را بر اساس دین خواستند.
So in our revolution, people demanded this development based on liberty, freedom, and independence.
و به همین دلیل نظامی که پیشنهاد شد جمهوری اسلامی بود.
And it was religious because we demanded the Islamic Republic.
جمهوری اسلامی یعنی یک حکومت دموکراتیک.
It means a democratic government.
که زنان در اون آزادن.
The ladies are free.
اندیشه آزاده.
Freedom of thought.
انتخابات تعیین کننده قدرت.
Election would be the main
و سایر اموری که وجود داره.
And the other issues.
طبعا چون مردم مسلمانن ارزش‌های دینی هم باید حاکم باشه.
And since people are Muslim, the religious values should be
اما
dominant
این
too.
ارزش‌های دینی نباید با این اصول ناسازگار باشه.
But these religious values should not be against these rights.
در همسایگی ما یک سیستم افراطی به نام امارت اسلامی افغانستان هم به وجود اومد.
In the neighboring country we had extreme Islam as in Afghanistan.
من نمیخوام از هر چه در ایران دفاع بکنم.
I do not want to defend whatever is going on in Iran.
ولی حتی تو معیارهایی که غرب داره امروز دموکراسی در ایران از همه کشورهای اسلامی.
But even based on the Western approach to democracy, Iran is the most democratic country in that region.
محدودیت زنان از همه کشورهای اسلامی کمتره.
We have less limitation for women in our
Thank
country.
you,
compared to other countries.
Mr.
آنچه که
Khatami.
هست مخالفت با ایران جنبه سیاسی داره.
They are fighting back Iran because of political reasons.
و ما هم امیدواریم که از طریق
And
مذاکره و از
We
طریق
hope
این
that based
مسائل
on
حل بشه.
negotiation we would be able to solve these problems
و ما شاهد یک بحران جدیدی در
and
منطقه
not to see another new
Und
crisis in
Herr
the region.
Wipf würde noch kurz ein
Mr. Wipf would like to just add something before we go to the floor again. I would just like to remind President Khatami, says Mr. Wipf, that we also have to ask the question, what is the position of non-Muslims in Muslim countries, not only Christians but also Jews? The situation does not correspond to our understanding of human rights, and we have to make a demand here. We don't want to have a symmetry of injustice, but we want to try and ensure that there is justice in our country, but we want to be sure also that these questions are taken seriously and that you take a position in favor of those who are not members of the state religion, so to speak, and there's a lot of work to be done there.
Wir haben da
من موافقم با
kurze Antwort.
Do you agree? Good, that's fine. Now there's a lady at the back there who has something to ask. Could you stand and we can see you? Carola Schneider from Austrian television. I have two brief questions to Mr. Khatami, or perhaps someone else might have a word to add. For 2 weeks ago in Austria there was a major discussion because a representative of a very popular party of the right wing said that the prophet of Muhammad was a pedophile, and there was a tremendous discussion. Everybody in Austria is aware of this and contradicted it. Does the Arabian world and in Iran, was there any reaction? Did they notice that this was said? And if so, what was the reaction? And also another question, what about the reaction to the minaret issue in Switzerland, where there is a move to ban the building of further minarets?
ما یه چیزی شنیدیم که وقتی دیوانه ها یه چیزی میگن باید آرام در کنارشون گذشت.
We have some proverb. We say that when some insane would claim something, we should be calm and let him go and let him pass.
سعی کردیم این حرفای اهانت‌آمیز هیچ مشکلی رو حل نمی‌کنه.
These insults would never solve any problem.
مخصوصاً اهانت به مقدسات ادیان مختلف.
Particularly when they insult the holy values of any religion.
چه مسیحی چه اسلام.
Christianity, Islam, whatever.
امیدوارم که یاد بگیریم که با ادب با دیگران رفتار کنیم.
I hope we would learn to behave against each other and respect each other's values. And you may talk about the minarets, of course.
Yes, no, that's maybe the problem at the moment. Herr Schlür, sagen Sie...
Mr. Schlür, what's the real crux of the issue? Is one afraid of the symbol, or is one afraid of a reality which already exists, really? Well, I don't think anyone has any fears here. It's a question of raising an issue and discussing it so that a solution can be found. Earlier, I spoke about the conflicting situation in relation to valid legislation. I don't need to repeat that. We cannot have any initiatives where all rights to freedom contained in the Constitution apply to Muslims. We can't have anything which says that, because they apply to everybody, to all people. But there's the fact that in parallel to our legislation, there seems to be another system of legislation which is in conflict with the legislation. We've discussed this with experts, and the issue of the minarets here, it is a symbol, that's true, it is a symbol which we've selected here. It's a symbol of this other legal system, legal interpretation of things. It's in conflict with our system of law. The minarets aren't mentioned in the Quran. They aren't something which belongs to the belief. Everybody, of course, can practice their religion, whether there's a minaret or not. Religious freedom is not being undermined or touched here. It's a question of the claim to apply another system of law. And this was something which was brought forward in relation to the minarets, but that is not the real issue. And then there was a question from the Austrian representative of television. We don't want this sort of general discussion. We want the problem of the establishing of a parallel society and a parallel system of law to be solved. If I might add this, we have noted that if you look at the Frankfurter Allgemeine and study it carefully, and that's a paper where, in dramatic terms, they draw attention to the fact that conflicts in Germany can find their roots in the fact that the spokesman for the Turkish Muslim society wants to refuse, and is refusing integration. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's no way to find a solution. We have to have a discussion. We believe that the first decisive step to a discussion should be made. We want to get away from the eternal generalizations and the internal prejudices and preconceived ideas. Thank you, says Mr. Schneider. There was an additional comment from the other member. The general ban on minarets is not going to solve something which isn't a problem, in fact. We have legislation relating to building, and those provisions and the legislation relating to buildings are perfectly sufficient. And we have, however, a legal problem which we're familiar with, where one is in conflict with national legislation. I think we shouldn't try to solve the issue of minarets in relation to legislation. It's not a real problem there. Just one further sentence, Mr. Schlür. I would just like to warn. If we have right statements and claims, then we mustn't undermine the possibility for discussion of issues. We need that. Now, Mr. Schlür, it would be dramatic if we didn't believe that with our system of law we can organize our life. Yes, but it's got to apply to everybody, that law, that legislation. Mrs. Matson.
Yes, as a Western Muslim, someone who's fully Muslim, fully Western, Canadian, born and raised, American resident, I find the language here quite interesting. Our law, our culture, our legislation, our country as if by being Muslim you are not one of us. And there are people who are visitors, but I believe there are Muslims who have been born in this country, and I would hope and I would expect that at the foundation there is a belief in equal rights for all citizens. I would hope that is the foundation that most of us are beginning at. And then whether it has to do with a free speech issue, an obnoxious sentiment or belief, that the law would apply the same whether you're a Muslim or a non-Muslim. Whether your obnoxious belief is, there's so many things that people say that are repulsive to us. All you have to do is go to the internet. All you have to do is turn on television, maybe some talk shows. In the United States, certainly we have them. There's some very repulsive ideas. There are even people who advocate for things that are illegal. For example, in the United States, I don't know how it is here, but people can actually freely advocate for pedophilia. As long as they don't engage it, it's legal. Now that is absolutely repulsive, but the understanding in the United States is that that's part of free speech. So there has to be an equality in terms of the citizens, how you will apply the law.
Sie würden quasi sagen,
So you're saying, really, from your understanding of the law and legislation, that the demand made by Mr. Schleur would be perfectly normal. It's perfectly normal that in a plural society, for the other community, the dominant legislative system applies to everybody. It's not something which you think should be discussed outside the whole system.
What I understand is that Muslims as citizens of the country should contribute to the discussion on legislation, should contribute by participating in the electoral process as voters and as legislators. That's the way that a democracy works.
Yes.
Within the broad foundation of the rights, then there is room for people to structure their families, their religious communities, in a voluntary manner, as long as it doesn't conflict with the Constitution. I don't see any problem with that, and I don't see most Muslims. Polling has shown that most Muslims believe that. Most Muslims who are living in Europe, the United States, Canada, believe in that. They consider themselves citizens who should be involved in the legislative process. Neither singled out for. The problem is that if there are certain rights that are accorded to other citizens as communities to organize themselves in certain ways, then they should be accorded to Muslims. So to be able to build houses of worship, Jesus also did not design the churches that we see in the landscape. They're beautiful, but that's part of the culture and tradition and choice.
That's a beautiful
It's not necessary,
image.
but it's the choice of the community. So I think we need to be fair and equal with this.
Thank you. Wir haben eine kleine Ergänzung von Herrn Wipf noch.
Mr. Wipf would like to add something, and then there'll be somebody from the floor. We'll have the floor, 2 people from the floor, and 3 people from the floor. An appeal from Mr. Wipf. This minaret initiative is something which should be taken seriously. It's an attempt being made to do what we accuse Islamic states of, that's to say, to take certain elements of the constitution and say they're not valid for certain sectors of the population. The majority of the population in our country, including young Muslims, they want to recognize our basic values in our constitution, and we have to have the strength to integrate people rather than excluding them.
Yes, thank you. My name is Martin Goldwind. I'm a member of the Baha'i community of Switzerland, Liechtenstein. I have a president for Mr. President Khatami. Much of the discussion here has been on the guarantee in Western countries concerning religious plurality. Your own country is an interesting example of a state that is based on religion. In this context, could you comment on the problems encountered by the non-recognized religious minorities to practice their religion in your country, particularly for the members of the Baha'i faith?
شناخته شدن مذهب به عنوان مذهب رسمی 4 مذهب بزرگ مسیحیت و یهودیت و زرتشتیت و اسلام این از قدیم هم بوده به رسمیت شناخته شده اینها نماینده به عنوان مذهبشون در مجلس دارن و نیز سایر امتیازاتی که پیدا میکنن
We have recognized as of the past 4 formal religions, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and Zoroastrians, and they have these representatives in the parliament and they have their own rights.
البته برای همه افرادی که در ایران زندگی میکنن حقوق شهروندی شناخته شده.
And we have citizen rights for all the people who are living in Iran.
این رو از نظر قانون اساسی میگم.
That is from the prospect of the constitution.
و هممون باید تلاش بکنیم که اگر در عمل مشکلی داره اون مشکل در عمل حل بشه.
And we have to all try that if there is any problem in this respect, we have to solve it together.
در ایرانم من فکر میکنم کسی به خاطر مذهبش تحت محاکمه و تعقیب قرار نمیگیره.
And I don't think that anyone would be persecuted because of the religious beliefs.
اگرم بگیره تخلف.
And if it is taking place, it is exactly wrong.
اما در مورد مسئله مسلمان‌ها در کشورهای غربی من یه نکته‌ای رو در خدمت خانم ماتسون در شیکاگو گفتم و نیز دوستان مسلمانمون در انگلستان.
And but with regard to the Muslims who are living in the West, I have talked to my dear colleague, the lady that is sitting over there.
یک مسلمان در کشور غربی یک شهروند.
A Muslim living in a European country, Western country, is a citizen of that country.
طبق تعهد اخلاقی و حتی تعهد شرعی.
Based on the commitment that he has to the constitution of that country.
باید به همه قوانینی که در اون کشور احترام بگذاره.
And he or she has to respect the constitution of that country.
و نباید خودش را غیر شهروند به حساب بیاره.
And should not believe that I'm not a citizen.
از اون طرف باید از همه حقوق شهروندی او هم تامین بشه.
On the other hand, he should have all the citizenship rights that he should have.
اگر ما این نگاه بکنیم هیچ مشکلی پیش نخواهد.
If we look at the matter from this prospect, there wouldn't be any problem, I think.
ما در یک جامعه به عنوان شهروند زندگی می‌کنیم.
We are living in a society as citizens.
می‌تونیم عقاید خاص خودمون
We may have our own beliefs.
و می‌تونیم در مسائل اجتماعی در کنار هم دیگه باشیم.
And we may be in the social activities next to each other. And take advantage of the rights we have. And also commit to whatever has been foreseen as our duties.
There's a young lady here. I'd like to give her the opportunity of speaking. I go to the grammar school here in Switzerland, and I have a question to Mr. Schlier. If the minarets are considered as a power initiative, what are our church spires and the bells which wake me every morning? What are they? People are demanding power as a result of them. Can we demand power for ourselves and then not give it to others? Why aren't you afraid of the undermining of the state as a result of women who are being urged to produce as many children as possible and wear long skirts?
من معتقدم که بیایم از مناره‌ها و برج کلیسا، مناره‌های مسجد و برج کلیسا پایین بیایم بریم توی مسجد و توی کلیسا.
So we have to, I think, forget about the minarets and whatever is the architecture of the churches. We have to go inside these holy places.
و داخل مسجد و داخل کلیسا مسلمانان و مسیحی برادر و خواهر باشیم.
And next to each other we are brothers and sisters wherever we are.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Schlier, wir müssen leider schon.
We have now to conclude. So, just a brief word, Mr. Schlier, please. Christianity and the possibility of it undermining the democracy. I don't belong to a group such as the one you seem to be afraid of. Secondly, I don't think there's any demand for power or claim for power which emanates from any churches or church buildings. And here I have to respond to what was said earlier. We don't prevent or forbid anybody to practice their religion, the religion which they wish to practice. We don't forbid anyone to meet together with others of the same faith. But we duly have to note that there where Islam is not only a religion but establishes legislation, that's where the problems arise. We have parents who represent the views our women don't have to go to school like the boys do. They don't have the same rights. And we, as authorities, when we are confronted with situations of this kind, we have to ensure that there is equality, that there are not these differences. in Wangen, near Alton, there are groups in favor of a minaret, and that's a very political group which is trying to gain power. They call themselves grey wolves, and they aren't harmless. And here we believe that if there are claims such as these for power, for recognition, then we have to solve these issues before they become insolvable. We've seen that in Paris and parts of London it's no longer possible to find solutions to these problems, and probably also it seems there are problems which are now insoluble. In Berlin we are for religious freedom and we respect religious freedom, but we are not in favor of anybody in the name of religious freedom wishing to establish certain legislative rights. On this point, I think we have to conclude, says the moderator. I think that general agreement is that nobody believes that any religious community should impose on anybody any form of life, so to speak, of living. Umberto Eco said to the Cardinal of Milan, is there a concept of hope and our responsibility for tomorrow which we can adopt together as believers and non-believers? I would like to thank all of you for having taken part, Mrs. Matson, Mr. Schleur, Mr. Klein, Mr. Katami, and Mr. Wipf. Thank you very much, and thank you for your attention, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay.